And so we return and begin again. Welcome to the Invisible Podcast, dear viewer, listener. We're on issuesode 13. My name's Bobsy. We are going issue by issue, page by page, panel by panel, theory by theory, sun by sun through Grant Morrison's cosmic conspiracy classic, The Invisibles. We are up to issue 13. But before we do that, I'm gonna put my tea down. And we're gonna have a quick recce back on last month's issue, Invisibles number 12, Dead Man Fall, which you'll remember. I'm saying this, I'm recording this in, it's the week and a bit after the election on the 12/13 full moon of England, December 2019. I mentioned this because A, it's a bummer, B, it's a disaster, potentially one of the worst things that's ever happened to my country in a long time, but we're going to go over it, or at least a lot of us won't, and that's scary. But the reason I mention it in the context of this, actually there's a couple of reasons, because I've got to sound off everyone is this week. Check it out. This is page 12 of Invisibles number 12, 12/12. The election, remember, took place on the 12th of the 12th as well, where our guy Bobby Murray signs up to join the army the day after Maggie's famous 82, was it? Earlier, landslide election victory. 12/12, 12 of the 12th. It happened. Basically, what we're drawing attention to here is that at the time, I thought that this sequence of panels held some trouble for the real world, and indeed it turns out it did. So we're on issue 13 now, so we've been doing the Invisible Podcast for a year. In that time, one of the things that I've learned quite clearly is that it's very lively, needless to say, which I think this is the clearest proof yet of, that there is serious electricity still underneath the surface of the Invisibles. Approach with caution, but also seems like the right thing to have done and be doing at the moment, because there's obviously a hell of a lot working underneath the Invisibles right now, and I think it's a useful thing to be reading and approaching with the depth that I am. No one's really watching here. So what we're going to, so bear in mind, like, the prophecy of it, like the fact that you can use the Invisibles to tell the immediate future, and be aware that you could use the Invisibles to reprogram, avoid, make that future what you want a bit. Also, the Invisibles is a very clear guide to how we might seek to survive, metabolize, and indeed resist some of the forces that have been unleashed in the past couple of weeks in this country, and globally, perhaps. When England goes mad, the world tends to suffer. So it's not. I'm not being too parochial in worrying about this. I don't think. I hope I'm not. So I feel like that this Invisibles project that I've embarked upon is a sensible one. For the next 5 years, we're going to be able to use the Invisibles, hopefully, to kind of sculpt the world that we want to see a little bit, and we're going to use it to kind of dodge or improve a few of the pitfalls that we might find along the way. Interestingly enough, in about a year's time, America's going to be facing the same thing that the UK is facing now, probably. We have to kind of hope a bit that, just in the spirit of optimism, that Bernie's hero soul, we'll talk about hero souls in a bit, is going to be big enough to defeat Trump. But you'd be daft to place money on it, in my view. But do place money on it. But then the Invisibles is actually going to be in America, so it all lines up just kind of too perfectly. So welcome to the Invisible Podcast. You're in the right place, is kind of what we're saying. Two things that kind of spin out of what we saw in last month's episode, and indeed in the election last week. Two things are significant. One is like New England, New Albion. Yeah, we've got to somehow work out how to recreate a better Blighty. That's going to involve But I mean, I don't really mean Blighty. I think I just mean England. I think Ireland is gone. That's great. I can't. My historic soul just thrills at that. Scotland's probably going to go too. Feel a little bit more ambivalent about that. I don't really, in my heart of hearts, feel like Scotland is kind of far enough away to be a different country. And and the half of my own sort of heritage that isn't Irish is Scottish. So I feel, even though I'm obviously just English, and I feel that like to lose Scotland would be a big loss. But nevertheless, we're probably going to. Therefore, it's all about England now, really. And the Invisibles does point some ways, but also points some things to avoid about how we can create that new Englishness thing. Basically, we're looking at we've got three strands, really, haven't we? We've got city, town, country, and at the moment it looks like we've got town and country versus city. So we've got to kind of work our way to link up those cities into a way which is more kind of effective and more kind of solidaristic, while also kind of making something of a an approach to the town and the country to sort of somehow bring those into the fold a bit, or to make them stop voting for fascists would be a great idea. So anyway, we're gonna work on that. That's one of the things that we've got ahead of us. What else? I've made notes. Oh yeah, the other one is probably, how we've been talking about throughout the Invisible so far, because it's got all of this like 90s digital utopianism in it. And I've been able to kind of trace some what I think are quite sinister undertones to the way that digital utopianism kind of developed. Another thing that makes me feel a bit validated is that one thing we definitely discovered was that there's the evil accelerationist wizard who's kind of made the Tory party win again, but not just win, but like crush my side. And he's doing it with the magic of Facebook, with these magical tools, which we see the conceptual and kind of cultural groundwork, development, worldview being laid for in the Invisibles. In this recent election, crushing defeat, we think about Facebook. Really, you have to think about Facebook. It's a mind control tool, as I keep saying. It's a mind control tool. It works. And also it works insofar as now they've tweaked the system to where it was always going to head, really, which is that it's an advertising platform, and whoever pays the most gets to have the most mind control coming out of the back end. Now, that's always going to be the forces of capital, right? It's always going to be the Tories. So they're always going to have more money to spend. So you have to do what you can to degrade the network efficacy of Facebook. Basically, you need to say, Mum, you can't message me on Facebook anymore. You need to, and you need to kind of stop looking for the digital utopia piece that the Invisibles kind of very tantalizingly shows you. You need to be able to not buy into that anymore. Basically, that's gone, and it's very clear that the major social media networks, are hegemony creating machines, mind control tools. I find it useful to think about them as like literally as like sci-fi. You push a button, it fires a beam, it controls the minds, not of everyone, but of enough people to kind of to move the needle in a really significant way. And so these tools need to be you need to extract yourself from them. You need to do what you can to build alternative networks, which would mean semi-private social spaces online where you can do that linking up work that the internet is actually good for. So you need to use alternatives, blunt the efficacy of the network itself by extracting yourself from it, and thinking of something else. Like option C is other, right? I don't know what the new thing that's going to save us from all of this nonsense is, but we do sort of have to build it in the next 5 years, or at least conceptualize, at least theorize it to a point where it's kind of helpful. Stop waiting for a good thing to emerge from like the digital realm, because it really might not. It might be baked into it that it can't. Okay. Yeah, but you can get off Facebook. That is a real and practical thing that you can do, which will help. So yes, I feel good about that. Rant over, rant on. Right, so we are actually going to get started with the issue properly now. This is issuesode 13 of the Invisibles. This is the issue here. It is part one of the She-Man arc, Venus as a Boy by Grant Morrison and Jill Thompson. As you can see from the oh dear, as you can see from the sturdiness test, this issue is the most knackered issue in my collection by some way so far. I can't remember what disaster befell that very clear tear on these. It's not even just the covers torn; it's the cover and page one are torn quite badly. At least it's still together, right? At least it's not. At least these pages haven't become lost. So I don't really know what that means, other than that, yes, it's arriving at a time of brokenness. I guess that's a pretty good read from it. Let's be aware that in all of its fabrics, the Invisibles is incredibly significant and lively right now. And yes, there's a tear in reality, and it's right here. Reality has been torn in the months since I last spoke to you. It's a pretty self-explanatory cover. Fanny's eyes and her nahual, which is oh my goodness, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation so much. Glazotjotl. We'll kind of talk about him a bit more, or talk about them a bit more in the next issue, I think. But yeah, that's the big blue Morpho-Menelaus butterfly. I think that's probably what it is. I think the exact species of the butterfly is played pretty fast and loose throughout this issue, so we're not going to worry about too much about the taxonomy of it. If I had to, we're going with Morpho-Menelaus. Nice big blue South American butterfly. And Fanny's beautiful eyes. A pretty, like a fairly easy cover, you think. Felt like Sean Phillips doing like his usual kind of solid work, and this looks good. It has a kind of a nice designy feel to it, and the butterfly looks nice, but that's not the best cover you've ever seen, is it? It's not really. Anyway, on the inside front cover, before we actually pile into the issue itself, we've got a torn copy of this Vertigo Gallery advert. Basically just a bunch, it's an advert for a Vertigo kind of issue, like just in one of these, but I think it's all just posters, just like single page posters, drawn by, lots of names. These are all the names of the artists who are going to be on it. Some of them are really exciting and interesting people. Chris Weston is probably of interest to us insofar as he's going to be a very significant artist on the Invisibles soon. Duncan Fegredo obviously did a little bit of work on the Invisibles too. Anybody else in there who we might kind of have a particular investment in? Glyn Dillon, who's gone on to create what Star Wars looks like now. David Lloyd, and obviously it's a Dave McKean cover. It is this advert itself, just because of the printing and the dodgy black and whiting, the grayscaling, is ugly. It's a horribly designed advert. This picture is kind of weird. It's like a ladder made of thorns that this little kind of pan devil guy, or Bacchus maybe, this little kind of devil is basically, I'm not sure. It looks like he's been climbing up a thorny ladder for a long time, and then realised that he's left the gas on downstairs, and he's got to go back down. But the thorns are all pointing upwards, so he's got a much more difficult journey heading down than he has up. It's all very, like the kind of the Vertigo Sandman Axis's obsession with like Miltonian symbols is probably can't be over exaggerated really, but yeah, this is very sort of stuck between the gutter and the stars, isn't it? Sorry, that obviously wasn't a Miltonian quote, but he's like, oh no, I've got to go back down. I spent ages climbing up this ladder, and now I've got to go back down. I think just because of the kind of the slight po-facedness with which a lot of this Vertigo stuff kind of manifests as the way it's presented, I'm going with unintentionally funny rather than intentionally funny. But this is an ugly and daft advert. It's not too much of an omen of things to come though. Other than the fact that it may be that if our little devil guy there is kind of looking downwards and kind of like not relishing the journey ahead. The next few issues of the Invisibles are pretty good, but but our heroes do sort of enter into the big storyline of the second half of the first book, which involves some challenges. So yeah, so they have a hard time. The characters themselves have a hard time over the next few issues, and maybe that's what he's looking at there. Okay, so in my way, obviously, we're on to page 1 now. Now, this rip here can't be a coincidence at all. Obviously, we don't like coincidences here on the Invisible Podcast. So we are going to note that the rip goes straight through the word Chalkutlikit. I'm really sorry about some of these pronunciations. I'm not going to do well with it. Chalchikutliku of the serpent skirt, or the jade skirt. She's like the river goddess of like the Meso-American mythology that this whole next 3 issues kind of revolves around a lot. The entire speech balloon that is ripped in half here is and the fourth son, the son of water, the son of Chalchutliku of the serpent skirt, is drowned under floods, leaving only stillness and darkness. So let's pay certain attention to that. I would note that if you read the issue, we get this issue gives us kind of like a nice summation of like Meso-American creation myths, like Aztec, Maya. I'm sorry to be so sort of vague about what's actually being the mythology that's being plundered here, but so's the comic. That's why I'm being vague about it, because there's not a huge amount of huge amount of like good research here. It's all quite kind of like pop research in this issue. I mean, so we've got the creation myth of like Meso-American mythologies, kind of contrasted in a kind of a not quite way with the 4 kind of life stages of the butterfly, the 4 stages of the butterfly's life cycle. The butterfly kind of gets born as this beautiful thing here, and really this where we are is over the page. We see we're in this one panel is in Fanny's like boudoir, her dressing room, and this issue jumps around a lot between times and spaces, as the series often does. But this is Fanny telling King Mob what her sort of families and her occult paths belief systems are. So some of it is kind of happening. All of this is kind of told across and through time. As far as Fanny's perspective goes, we'll see where she is in a bit. So we're jumping around and we're in her boudoir, but we're also in what looks like a kind of a Soho kind of cafe here. It's not really a cafe because King Mob looks like he's drinking either gin and tonic or just water, and because it's the 90s and he's a legend, I think it's probably gin and tonic. And Fanny's drinking an extravagant sort of Del Boy cocktail. This is the first time we've ever seen Fanny not kind of feminine presenting. Obviously, this whole arc is about Fanny's Lord Fanny and her transgenderism. As a cis-sexual, heterosexual guy, 40 and white and pointless. I'm older than 40. I'm terribly badly qualified to talk about this kind of thing. And so we're going to sort of solve that hopefully next episode, but I don't want to talk too much about that. But if I avoid any kind of gender issues which I might hideously get wrong in this episode, that's why, because I'm hoping that we can cover it properly next time. Okay. But Fanny's here, but we haven't seen her like this before. She's roughly sort of masculine presenting, but she's not herself. She's down. Something's not quite right with her. King Mob spots it. King Mob says he's off to see Edith. They have this interesting shout here. Fanny says, "Do you feel as though time's speeding up, darling? I mean, actually getting faster?" And King Mob's like, "Yeah, everyone says that these days. Maybe it's like a whirlpool, and the closer we get to the apocalypse or the eschaton or whatever you want to call it, the more things happen in a shorter time." Which is a lovely image of it actually. That like as you get closer to this plug hole, the swirls in the corkscrew get smaller and tighter together. I think we've mentioned this before, but like the time going faster is like an inevitable and obvious consequence of communications technology getting better. getting faster, even though the world hasn't in the Invisibles in like the mid-90s hasn't kind of emerged into online land like we live in now. The kind of the infrastructures being built, the corporations and the banks and the states are linking up during this period, and history does feel like it's happening faster. And one of the kind of the big, this is the mid-90s, so one of the big sort of literal walls between the 20th century and what comes after the 20th century has just been broken down, and things are rushing through. And that's why time feels like it's going faster. It's just, humans can only react as quickly as the information they receive, and they're receiving information at an unprecedented rate and volume at this time. Like we're way down the plug hole here in 2019, looking down the barrel of 2020. But it was the technology was literally being put into place and being built here. So it's not a surprise that these guys are feeling the early effects of it. Also, time is getting quicker. The eschaton is a word that kind of comes from like Terence McKenna's cosmology mythology, which we've sort of heard before. I'll do some more. I haven't really got into where the word eschaton comes from or anything, but like in terms of its the meaning of the actual word and the origin of the word. But we tend to say singularity now. And I was already talking about the evil accelerationist wizard, right? Who runs the country now. He would, like, the word that we use, that and people like him use, is singularity. And eschaton kind of means the same thing. Singularity, though, is very like tech, whereas eschaton has got like magic brain fairies in it, which an eschaton's cooler, and everyone's taken a lot more ecstasy. More on that later. But yeah, it's been called the singularity now, which is much more frightening. The eschaton seems to imply, like, the word and the kind of the way that people used to use the word eschaton kind of has this kind of efflorescence about it. It's kind of it's a fountain, whereas a singularity isn't a fountain. It's not even a whirlpool. It's more just like a funnel or a road heading towards a brick wall. So those are the ripped pages. They're in a bar in Soho. It looks really fun. Really cool bar or calf. I'm saying Soho because these are characters from Soho. These are gay people, or queer people. As we probably say now. And they're having a great time. They're all hanging out in a trendy London cafe. It's the mid-90s. What could be better? Over onto page 3, and we cut to the transformation shop on Everholt Street in so if they're in Soho in this cafe, Fanny's kind of walk north for about 20 minutes, or got a cab obviously, or a tube north. So this is kind of like south. Transformation is in like South Camden. It's right next to Euston Station. Well, actually was. It's not actually there anymore. The business has kind of moved online largely. I think there's maybe still one in Manchester. Transformation started in Manchester, and the branch in Eversholt Street was had been opened was opened in like 1989, maybe 1990. So it'd been open for a little while. It was definitely a like an early kind of safe space and like bolt hole for the trans community. And for kind of various reasons, for reasons which I don't think are probably negative, it's moved. The transformation shop is now an online, like an almost entirely online only business. I would note that the transformation shop's actual real life location is a less than 5-minute walk from the home of Mary Shelley, who in Polygon Street, just around the corner, lived in. Who's obviously Mary Shelley is obviously a character from the Invisibles that we know. In real life, she lived just around the corner from here, less than a 5-minute walk from this shop. So that's pretty cool. It's also like Dickens territory, but more than Dickens territory, it's Godwin Shelley territory. Like when the Shelleys and Godwins were in London cooking up their radical ideas, they were 2 streets away from here. So that connects to right. Somerstown, yeah, Dickens territory. 2 lads are in here. Being one of them is obviously a closeted trans person, or a bit genderqueer, whatever. Sorry for not getting any of this right, but he's kind of quite keen, pretending that he isn't, and his mate is not keen, and they're kind of being like a bit boorish and loud and homophobic. This guy, he's got a can in his hand, and he's got bubbles around his head. So he's, Jill Thompson does good drunk bubbles. When somebody's drunk, she takes care to draw the bubbles around the head. What else am I going to say about this? Oh yeah. So they've both got. Oh, this is really weird. They've both got red scarves on, right? And I think there's like a nice little kind of fault with the script process here, in that Morrison has sort of said these lads are both wearing red scarves, and Jill Thompson has gone, oh, okay, scarves. But really, they must be football scarves, whereas these aren't. These are just scarves, but they don't look like football scarves, which is what they must be. There's no way that these lads would just be wearing matching red scarves. They're not like in some kind of like communist youth league or anything like that. Although the Cuban connection there is maybe quite nice. But yeah, so like I said, the transformation shop in Somerstown is right next to Euston Station. So we kind of need to think about who these guys are and why they're wearing red scarves. Red scarves basically means either Man United, Arsenal, or Liverpool, basically. They could be Arsenal fans. Arsenal is only a 5-minute tube ride from here. The old Highbury Stadium, as it would have been back then. Similarly, Euston serves Manchester and Liverpool. So they could be. So they're either Londoners about to go north to watch a match, or they're Northerners who've come into town to watch a match, or they could be Londoners who are going further into London to watch a match. Right? There could be Arsenal fans from elsewhere in London. I don't know why I think this is so funny and interesting, but it's like these guys have got red scarves on, and I want to know why. I think they're Londoners. They don't really have, like, you can't imagine Morrison resisting giving them slightly more Scouse or Manc dialogue, especially at this time, especially in the mid-90s, if they were. Also, if they were Manc, they're probably not Scouse, because Dane McGowan comes from Liverpool, and we've got enough Liverpool people in the comic already. Obviously the Beatles too, who are like in every issue of The Invisibles. There's a transformation shop in Manchester. Like, that's where the business kind of originated. So he wouldn't. So I mean, I guess, our guy Billy here, who's the one who's kind of sincerely but in denial about being interested in in the stuff that they sell in the transformation shop. He is either, so he could come from Manchester, but know that he can't go into the transformation shop in Manchester because that's too close to home. But he's gone down to London to go and see United play, and he's got out of the station, maybe on purpose, maybe he knew the shop was there waiting for him, but he's dragged his mate in there to sort of, because he wants to have a look, but he's got to do so kind of with plausible deniability. Anyway, this guy Billy here, nice old lady who's helping Fanny choose a new pair of tits. Remember, so all of this connects quite nicely with what we've seen before. Although we're leaving behind some of the stuff that we saw in the first year of The Invisibles, we're also not, right. So the Lord Fanny that we used to have, in many ways, sacrificed her fanniness, her tits, in the battle with Orlando in the windmill, right? That was kind of the sacrifice that she gave in order to be able to defeat him. Although she still has to pay for that. That's kind of what the point of these next 3 issues are. There's a funny joke about tits. The lads, Billy and his friend over here, then Billy gets very cross because obviously he's got something to hide. This guy's not really fast. He's just like, I don't want to go. But Fanny is quite fascinated with this little boy's backstory too. She kind of like intercepts him while he's about to be horrible to the nice lady who works in the shop, and she can kind of read his mind, or she can just kind of cold read him well enough to know when, she's got trans radar, and she kind of uses her freakish intuition to not freakish, just like witchy intuition. Sorry, to freak him out, and that's cool. So she uses her magic powers on him. He goes, and he's kind of revealed as this is a fairly kind of common trope, right? That like homophobes are secretly suppressing their own queerness, kind of thing. It's an iffy one, that, but it was very kind of common in the 90s. We cut to Fanny's dressing room, and she is kind of in the process of becoming Fanny, becoming her real self. At this point, I'm gonna jump off just for a sec. There's this nice kind of, I think this is the first time we've ever had a thought balloon in the Invisibles, I think. It's nice. We get this nice kind of stream of consciousness. It's well written. It's kind of, it's playful. We find out that, Fanny's kind of she's got a nasty thought lurking in the back of her head, which she's kind of avoiding. She's taken some drugs, probably some ecstasy, judging from just the rush of this, to get over it. Ecstasy isn't a great antidepressant, although it can kick you out of a bad mood, obviously. What else? So she's running away from this scary thought, but she's also putting on her, I'm not going to call it armor, I'm going to call it her hero self. A lot of the, so Fanny, being a trans person in a comic, is really well intentioned. It was totally, if not, all right, not totally unheard of and revolutionary in comics at the time, but actually very much like it was a very future forward thing to be doing, and Grant Morrison gets the creators of the comic get loads wrong about trans issues. That's what we're going to talk about those next time. But really what's kind of happening here is that the description of Fanny's kind of transformation into a woman isn't really what's going on here. What's really going on here is that Fanny is transforming into her superhero identity. That I genuinely think that, at least in this sequence on these next couple of pages, that's a much better way of reading what's going on here. Anybody who is kind of into the chaos magic stuff that we talk about here sometimes probably already knows Gordon White's Rune Soup blog and podcast. In the month since I recorded the last one, Gordon White has done 2 podcasts where the Invisibles have been in with it. One was kind of like a direct comparison of the Invisibles with Alan Moore's Providence, which Gordon White did with like the king of synchromysticism, the synchromystical wizard Magus, Christopher Knowles. And then Gordon was joined by an astrologer called Austin Coppock, where they also mentioned in passing the Invisibles with reference to Iamblichus's hierarchies of spirits. Now, we're going to say that real quick because the kind of in Invisibles land, we've got the baddies who are the Archons, and we are trying to win. We're trying to beat them, right? One of the ways, and Austin and Gordon mentioned this, they said Iamblichus puts the heroic human soul above the Archon, right? So as much as it may feel that the Archons are the kings of the universe and force us to do what they want, actually the normal human has an ability to leapfrog and defeat the Archon through becoming their heroic self. This kind of takes us back to like antiquity, where culture heroes or warriors, heroic, your Theseuses and your Odysseus's would kind of take on demigodhood, right? Which would mean they're not demigodhood, but they would have a status beyond that of like normal people, which was great, and in fact more powerful than the Archons, who would otherwise be the guys who are in charge, right? So you can defeat the Archons by becoming your hero self. What we see is Fanny becoming her hero self in this next couple of pages. That's kind of really important for how we kind of understand what the Invisibles is and does. That kind of hero becoming process happens kind of minute by minute. It manifests at any point really where we resist, transcend, or otherwise kind of defeat the imperatives of the Archon, whichever the Archon that kind of rules the sphere of where we are in any given moment is. When we beat them, we become a hero. We become a hero to beat them, and by beating them, we become a hero. Which which really kind of is worth mentioning here because, like, obviously archonic imperatives change. What we see Fanny doing here in many ways looks a bit like she's just doing it for the gram. Yeah, she's putting on makeup, she's making sure she's at her most fabulous. Being fabulous in itself isn't necessarily or is probably rarely the same as defeating the Archon. Most of the trans people I know are like, basically most of the trans people I know are wearing their hero selves all the time, because they are, by their very nature, in defiance of the archonic structure, which says you must conform to gender X and Y. And they and because of their being, they can't, and so they don't, and so they spend their whole lives just being fucking brave and awesome. And this is kind of the process that we see Fanny doing here. Although I don't think it's a gender thing here, I think it's a hero thing here. I think this is a secret identity thing, really. We'll get onto that in a minute, but we've got to take a quick ad break. So we've got this hand of Cristo Redentor here. And then we have a full-on crucifix pose here in this advert for Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions, which was a movie that which I watched the other night. It's good fun. It's good fun. Clive Barker does his usual kind of like bloody camp thing, but it's got Scott Bakula, who I always want to call Blackula. He is in it, and he's got quite kind of good solid dude energy, right, which kind of grounds the film. It's like this kind of like it's this kind of like schlocky LA noir thing. It's really good fun, and kind of and quite, yeah, it's just really good fun. It's just a really good horror fantasy movie. I would recommend you watching it. And the kind of the sort of the kind of the quite high pitch of it is grounded quite well with Scott Bakula. This advert has got an excellent mandrill in it, and some screaming people, and also a magician here in the doing a Christ pose. And then you turn the page, and you've got another Christ pose here, and you've got Fanny doing one here, and then over on the next page, she's not doing a Christ pose anymore. She's just being fabulous. But the thing I was talking about with the hero self and how you put it on a minute ago, one does it, as this comic is telling us, through a process of illusion, which involves a little bit of magic, but also just like kind of a better awareness of how illusoriness can kind of reconstitute your surface in a more authentic way. This kind of comes into some heavy, like, Jesus iconography here, some heavy, like, Redeemer shit. We also need to be aware that, like, our current, like, digital attention economy is different to how it was in the 90s. So doing it for the gram didn't exist then, but now you've got the archon of doing it for the gram, which means that simply being fabulous isn't going to qualify you for hero status. That's going to take extra, the cognitive economy wants you to be fabulous so that you're producing, visual capital for people to engage with, right? So for people to channel their attention into. That kind of capture of the surface of the self hadn't occurred yet by this point. So I'm afraid that just looking good isn't enough to be a hero anymore. You have to practice certain extra levels of love, bravery, kindness, wisdom. Yeah, other forms of resistance are necessary. Not to say that your hero self can't look fabulous, obviously, but like the fabulousness itself isn't enough. Whereas actually, I think fabulousness would have been enough back in 1995. But unfortunately, fabulousness has been enclosed by Instagram, right? Fabulousness isn't bold and neutral. Fabulousness is owned now. Lord of Illusions, Jesus, Clive Barker, watch it. It's good fun. Oh my goodness. So obviously, one of the things, as well as like some of the kind of like the crude, if well-meaning sort of stuff around trans issues in this arc of the Invisibles, bash right up into like colonialist ones as well, because as much as Fanny is like a kind of a not entirely sort of right depiction of a trans person, trans woman. Neither is she, I would say, not being Brazilian. Neither, I would say, is she a particularly good representation of being a Brazilian person, because and in the same way that I think this uh, Meso-american cosmology that we're given on back on page 1 is in many ways kind of like it's like the guy who does a lot of acids version of you know America, the anthropology of the Americas, and I think we've come a long way since then. But also a lot of it is kind of a bit like it's very 90s. It's very like we can just take that because it's the 90s and everything's fun. Which brings me on to this is our Sam Goody Musicland advert for the month, and we've got Rusted Root. I had never heard of Rusted Root prior to 2 days ago. God, life was better then. Rusted Root, it's world beat rock. This is their album When I Woke. When I Woke, right? We won't get on to wokishness, which is again a term of like specific cultural meaning and power, which has been horribly recapitulated by the system. Yeah, it's like, look, I mean, look at how bad that cover is. You're like, is the music as bad as that? Yeah, it's just as bad as that. Yeah. It's like white middle of the road rock with just like what with like world music rhythms. I'm sorry, like the guys at Rusted Root are obviously really good percussionists and stuff, and they can definitely bang on drums in a way which is better than most people. But just the kind of the mishmash of like ethno-ness of it is really is just horrible. It's fucking. I only hate it because it's shit. Do you know what I mean? It's really really bad. Probably the worst record that I've come across in any of this Invisibles advert music research. It's just rubbish. It's like sometimes the beats are African, sometimes the beats are South American, and it's just like, but it's all the same, isn't it? It doesn't matter. It's just all the same. It's like the kind of the crass cultural colonialism, neo-colonialism thing that Grant Morrison does a lot in his kind of travelogues in this issue. The reason that is bad is because it lets people like Rusted Root think that they can make music like that, and they can't. They mustn't. If it was ethno trance, I would be more forgiving of it because there is a genuine, if again somewhat misguided, there's a genuine impulse within within house and rave to kind of like forcefully create a new world culture via the lingua franca of the beat. Yeah. So as much as ethno trance can be a bit dodgy too, it's more forgivable because at least they're trying to fashion like a music which is genuinely globalist or global, right? These guys are just doing like white middle of the road rock with a bit of with a bit of that in it, and it stinks really bad. And the kind of the crudeness of their appropriation of those rhythms and the crudeness of this frankly terrible sleeve art is to be found a bit in the way that some of the issues in these issues of the Invisibles are handled too. However, these are still good issues of the Invisibles, and we just have to have very long podcasts explaining around some of the weaknesses that are in them. Right? That's all we're doing. It's fine. The second album here that you can buy this month at Sam Goody's Musicland is Sparkle and Fade by Everclear. So I was really gonna try hard to listen to the whole of the Rusted Root album. And I was almost like pushing through. I was almost getting to it's so bad it's good. I can do this. I can do this. And then my wife came in and said, "What the fuck are you listening to?" and turned it off. For which, and actually that felt good. That was really good. Everclear were an absolute breath of fresh air afterwards. Very straight ahead, good time. post-grunge rock. You know, they obviously really like Jane's Addiction. They really like Nirvana. They can make tunes which sound a bit like both, and they're having a good time. One of the things that has been popping up in these Sam Goody Music Land adverts a lot is the way that after Cobain's death, American like alt rock is kind of having a bit of a struggle to sort of rebuild itself. These guys are kind of going, well, hang on a minute. Grunge is still a pretty good template for just having some tunes. We could just enjoy rock and roll for a bit, and I think that's kind of necessary, actually. That as much as kind of grunge represents like a deliberate kind of killing of rock and roll, or at least a kind of like a defallicing it. Cobain famously said that the only future for rock and roll is a female one, and he's right. And I think developments in 21st century rock have proved him right. But in the meantime, there was a reasonable template for rock there in grunge. You could still make songs with it which people wanted to listen to and which are quite good fun, and that's entirely what Everclear have done with this album. It's not too angsty, some really good tunes and hooks and choruses, and you're like, yeah, this will do for 5 years, actually, just music like this will do. I'm always a bit iffy on like American college rock, but this was a delight. Coming after Rusted Root, especially, it was good. Like rock had plundered the rhythms of South America and the world prior to Rusted Root coming along, but Talking Heads or Eno had maybe used those rhythms to kind of pick holes in the rock template and kind of and find new corners to it which were kind of interesting. This isn't that. This is just taking some funky rhythms from another country and selling them to white Americans. White Americans taking the funky rhythms from another country and selling it to white Americans for $1. Like, that's it. There's nothing better or purer or nobler or more interesting involved in it than that. And that's why they suck. Similarly, they kind of like Everclear kind of use grunge to just make rock fun, and they do that. I like Everclear after listening to this. I will always like them for not being Rusted Root. Back in the story, we get another shot of the Noir, the totem butterfly of Fanny's here, who's flapping around the skirts of Cristo del Ento, and Fanny's getting well into it now. Her internal monologue is becoming faster. I love the detail in this panel that there's this horrible crap easy chair in Fanny's glamour palace. Yeah. So like part of glamour is that you make it out of dirt. So this fabulousness here is, basically Fanny probably lives in just like a horrible bedsit in Soho. I'm really interested in like where the Invisibles live when they're not being super time traveling assassins kind of thing, and witches. And Fanny is a 23-year-old woman who lives in a crappy bedsit in Soho. You can see the crappy bedsit bit here, but deeply, an important part, an equally important part of the best part of that crappy bedsit is this temple of glamour here, which is great. She gets well into it. She's coming up on the ecstasy really strong now. She's got Barbie dolls because she kind of uses a slightly exaggerated articulation of femininity. She adopts the Christ pose. Boom. She is suddenly transposed with Jesus the Redeemer, the Lord of Illusions, but we're talking about illusions in the sense of glamour, right? Of being like illusions that are real, if you like, or a process of becoming real that starts with illusionness. I'm not a big fan of this statue. I always looked at it patronising to me, especially when you sort of see him, the way it's kind of used as like, Rio's like really, especially in the mid-90s, Rio's really poverty-stricken, but it's cool because we've got like poor Jesus who makes everybody, this is like Christianity as a opiate of the masses kind of thing in a bad vibe. to me, although it's a cool statue, obviously. See these spotlights here? So normally, right, if you were going to just draw a picture of Cristo Redentor, this world famous, beautiful statue that hovers over Rio de Janeiro, where Fanny comes from, we're kind of digging back into her history now, obviously. If you were going to draw a big panel of that and put it in your comic, would you put the floodlights in? Would you put the floodlights in? Got to tell you guys, Cristo Redentor is one of the first ever statues to be floodlit so that you could see it at night. Do you want to know who did the floodlights originally back in the 30s or whatever? Marconi, the Marconi company, who we spent quite a lot of time with in our last episode, as being, the Marconi deaths, the Black Goo, the Falkland Islands, that whole big story. Marconi, in this issue too, these floodlights are Marconi floodlights. Thanks very much. You're welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Over on the page, boo! Yeah, she's on it. She's properly Russian. She looks absolutely amazing. She has put on her hero skin, and we get our splash page. Not a moment too soon. She-Man, Part 1, Venus as a Boy. Grant Morrison, writer. Jill Thompson, she's back. Artist Daniel Vozzo, colours and separations. Clem Robbins on letters. Julie Rottenberg, the associate editor. Stuart Moore, the editor, and The Invisibles is created by Grant Morrison. Hardly needs to be said, but we're really glad to have Jill Thompson from the previous Arcadia +1 issues back. She's kind of the definitive Invisibles artist in this period, and she is great, and I love the work in this issue, even though there are some real Morrison gives us some really wobbly moments. He makes things hard for her, deliberately. For now, Venus as a Boy, it's a Bjork song, but you knew that. It's a really good Bjork song too. I sort of hated it at the time because I felt it was a bit too coffee table, a bit too polite. But there's a real sort of richness of mystique around it, and it has a futuriness and a timelessness to it that kind of all pop could have been aspiring to in the 90s. The 90s was a really good opportunity for futurism, and unfortunately, mass culture took a really big step backwards, and we can see that happening in the Invisibles with all the kind of the cool Britannia bullshit that it gets into. But Björk and her kind of she gave a really good template for what new pop could be like, and Venus as a Boy is maybe the highest point of it. Venus, love god, traditionally a woman, as a boy, get it? Even though the song came out in 93 and wasn't even that big a hit, Björk's album hung around for years afterwards, and Venus as a Boy was definitely a song that you would hear in this calf that they're sitting in. Venus as a Boy would definitely be playing on the radio or jukebox in this establishment here. It's still very much a contemporary song, even though it's a couple of years old by now. Over the page. Great splash page. Fanny looks amazing. Sorry, we're not over the page. We've gone back again. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there's a mirror behind Fanny, and we are also got the mirror's POV here, which means that there's a mirror that there are two mirrors facing each other. Fanny's got an infinity machine in her bedsit, which is where you have a mirror facing a mirror, and you get infinite reflections in there. It's a traditional. I'm not sure where the tradition comes from, but you use it to capture spirits, right? If you do that to two mirrors, you do create a portal, if you like, that spirits can walk through. Some of them might be demons. I did that in my house once. Me and my missus did that because we thought it looked cool, and within a fortnight of us putting a mirror facing a mirror in the hallway, in a house that we lived in down in the lanes, within a fortnight of doing that, the cat was dead and my wife's grandmother was dead, so we took it down. I think it's bad luck, but anyway, it's a great place for manifesting spirits or hero selves. Yeah, two mirrors. This is what Fanny's doing to herself here. She's literally magicking herself up, her best self, and living it, darling. Over the page, like I said a minute ago, we're in London still. It's all very London, but it just shows you a nice kind of snapshot of how different London can be back then here. We meet Brody, who's like the antagonist of this issue. He's hanging out with some Miles in a shooting range. So talking of like spiritual technology, like the double mirror spirit trap. There's a dream catcher here, which is another kind of spirit trap. One of the themes of these few issues, obviously, is like indigenous technologies, right, that people use to capture spirits with. One of them that we see here is hovering above Brody's bed. As Sir Miles says, good to have Sir Miles back. We like him. He says, "We're not going to bloody tell you what your dreams are. We just put that dream catcher above your bed to siphon off oniric energy. We're not bloody Sigmund Freud. Neither am I Sigmund Freud. So I'm not going to explain Brody's dream of like dead tiger cubs and whatnot to you. Suffice to say, all of the basically the cosmology that we get back on page 1 is basically there's Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl. Tezcatlipoca is your evil name of the father, scary sky father god, and Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent is your culture hero trickster god a bit more. Tezcatlipoca is like I say, your scary sky father god, creator god one. But he's also a cat, right? He's a jaguar, and we can see that Brody is being drawn into Fanny's kind of mesh, her synchro mesh, because he's having dreams about cats too. That's kind of what this means. Got to shout out this little cameo here from Dane, our boy Jack Frost, who's missing currently. There's a great shot of him just kind of nearly being hit by a car, and he's sticking his V's up in both directions, like it's being called a. The people driving the car are calling him a little wanker, and he's just like, whatever they want. And that's very Dane, and we like him for that. They're in the shooting range, Brody and Sir Miles. Brody has got this kind of James Bond toxic masculine thing here. It's very 70s. It's very Sweeney. It's very The Professionals. We're going to talk about that in a few issues' time. This kind of this 70s, 90s masculinity thing. He's kind of like, so Brody's like a cheap Jack James Bond with all of like the polymorphousness and misogyny that kind of comes with. And that's kind of all we need to know about Brody, really, I think, at this stage. The kind of the model of masculinity that's being explored in his weird 70s vibe. There's a better time to talk about that. We'll do that later. They're at the shooting range in a bit of, Sir Miles' dialogue here is great. The way that Brody is kind of subtly taking out the piss out of him is great. They are at a shooting range, and they're shooting at pictures of Santa because they're so evil. They're shooting at pictures of Santa. Now, if you remember the page with the election on it in the previous issue, the election that was a disaster, that came true, right? So what we don't want is Christmas to be ruined because Santa's been shot in the third eye and in his heart chakra. We don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is this whole episode, normally only Patreon people get it, and then you have to wait a few months before we make it free. This one's just going free. This is a Christmas gift from me to you, and we're doing this as a deliberate act to stop Santa being ruined. It's like Christmas Eve when I'm recording this, 2019. And obviously, we know that the Invisibles is lively magic, and that the fact that there's dead Santa in an issue which there's no reason that I should be reading this close to Christmas is a little bit too synchronicitous. We're gonna push any of this nasty magic out of the way quickly by giving away this entire episode for free in the spirit of Christmas. Happy Christmas to all watchers of the Invisible podcast. Over on the next page, we've got an advert for The Prophecy, the Christopher Walken movie. I haven't watched this in years. I remember it being not quite there yet as a superhero movie, right? It was a bit like that. Like it's about like angels fighting different factions of angels. There's a lot of invisiblesness in there.
On ancient ground at the edge of the world, an evil born in heaven is about to be unleashed on earth.
It's a bit like The Invisibles, like everything is. it's not a bad one from my memory. I will say that, like, a bit like Lord of Illusions, which for some reason just sort of takes place in the desert. It's the Californian desert, and so does the prophecy. So there's a bit of a link there. So we've got like indigenous American desert culture stuff happening in this issue. The prophecy, Fanny's thing, the Lord of Illusions thing, angels. Fanny mentions on page 2, this world, we live in the fifth sun. In this sun, things will become faster and faster, and this world will end in its turn devoured by celestial monsters. So that's the prophecy that Fanny's talking about on page 2. This is the prophecy coming true in a film, because everybody thinks that the world is going to end as it's devoured by sky monsters. We're going to say that that isn't going to happen, because we're going to use the power of the invisibles to make sure it doesn't. Okay, readers? Thanks very much. Over on the next page, we have our traditional advert from White Wolf Publishing. Usual thing. It is a tale of the jihad, the clandestine war among vampires that has for centuries shaped the course of history. It's a bit like The Invisibles. Great cover art here for this republication of Nomad of the Time Streams by Michael Moorcock. The art is by, it's really good. It says his name here somewhere, I'm sure. Clyde Caldwell. This great shot of like a kind of a Russian constructivist hero with these airships that look a bit like cock bullets, with the world with all this like flag regalia on them. It looks really good. If you like Michael Moorcock, then you probably like this one. I haven't read it, but it looks good, doesn't it? It sounds classic him. Infinite multiverse, an Earth where historical facts turn on its head. Slavery remains a practice in the US. The Great War is fought from huge airships, and the Russian Revolution proves a failure. We're going to get to this Eternal Champion stuff, this Michael Moorcock stuff, again, in a few issues' time. Suffice to say that in this issue, a lot of stuff kind of that's lurking in the future of the Invisibles is kind of landing in a pre not quite there yet form here. So there's loads of interesting Invisibles stuff working away in the center of this, at the edges really of this issue, but we're not quite ready to talk about it yet. Also, it's Christmas. I've got loads of wrapping to do. I'm trying to get through this episode quickly without it going on for 3 hours. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Over on the next page, we could be back in the same club that King Mob and Fanny were in earlier. Fanny's there now in her full fabulousness, but she's still not feeling very well. She's also taken some drugs. She's talking to her friends, and they're like, "Hey, Fanny, what's going on?" It's nice that they've got friends who aren't invisibles, right? Unless maybe these ladies are invisibles. The word Kirby pops up, which is always interesting when you hear it in a Grant Morrison comic. Fanny gets ill. She rushes to the bathroom. The bathroom's got Masonic checkerboard tiles, and she pukes up, but she's puking up magic mirror, like Jim Crow when he was in doing his Voodoo Vision Quest a few episodes ago, like that, right? So this is a thing. This is a thing in the Invisibles, right? Is the magic mirror, the soul self that Fanny's like puking up. We know that she's not very well, but that's quite extremely unwell, isn't it? Over on the page. There's quite a lot going on here. This is Jill Thompson, who was told in the script by Grant Morrison to draw this page like she's Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld, or King Mob Liefeld, is you know who he is. He invented Deadpool. He's a very kind of famous, well-paid comic book artist who invented Deadpool and a load of other stuff in the 90s. He like this is like comics in joke stuff. This is sensible grown-up comics like The Invisibles laughing at bad superhero comics like Rob Liefeld comics. It's also kind of an exercise in making Jill Thompson draw something that she would never draw, and she gets the absurdity and, to be fair, some of the dynamism of Rob Liefeld's art style down here. She does a good job of doing bad art. We're not allowed to say that Rob Liefeld's art is bad anymore because he's been rehabilitated, but it is. and she does a good job of nailing it here. This is the Liefeldification of King Mob telling his story of the break-in at Harmony House. So we see Bobby Murray actually here being shot by King Mob's absurd harpoon phallus weapon, which is kind of funny given like all of the tenderness and care with which Bobby Murray's story was told in the last episode. Here, King Mob's just being a prick about it again, which is quite funny. Over on the page, we're back with Edith. Do you remember Edith, the old lady from episode 1, and maybe some other episodes, and maybe she even popped up in our last episode, remember? Edith says to call on Booty. Here's Edith. King Mob and her are chatting about how to find Jack. And he's telling her what happened at Harmony House. We find out that she no longer has the psychic link with Tom, with old Mad Tom. Remember, King Mob asked her to find Mad Tom using their psychic link before. So this is Rob Liefeld style. This is Grant Morrison making Jill Thompson draw in Dave Gibbons' Watchmen style. There's a purpose behind all this. I think we'll get to it in the third issue of this arc. But yeah, Jill Thompson is being deliberately asked to adopt art styles other than her own throughout this issue. This one is Watchmen. Dave Gibbons doing Watchmen. Is it just me? Or is the top tier of panels, are these panels not the same height? These ones look shorter to me. It could be an illusion, could be a Lord of Illusions, but I think that these panels here are shorter than these two here, whereas the whole point of the Watchmen grid is that it's absolutely perfect. So she's maybe not doing a great job on that. To be fair, I think these pages are quite annoying. It's Grant Morrison kind of dressing up as Alan Moore as much as he is forcing Jill Thompson to dress up as Dave Gibbons. There are lots of kind of like on-the-nose references to stuff that's kind of happening in the panels. The best bit is that Edith, who's a very old lady, is wild smoking skunk, and that's great. She's got this poster. I don't want to go so far as to say that like greyhounds and ladies standing next to them are like a leitmotif of Art Deco itself, but greyhounds, because they're kind of fast and thin, were a very trendy dog during the 1920s. Obviously, Edith is about the right age to have been around in the 1920s, and I have not had any luck identifying this picture, but it does have the feel of a picture that's a real picture about it, doesn't it? It's a lady, a 20s lady, in an Art Deco style, walking a greyhound. Greyhounds, right? Hunting dogs. We know that they precede the procession of the equinoxes and are a powerful magical totem item, therefore. I think that Edith should try not smoking skunk. I think that's going to have a really high THC to CBD ratio. She wants something which is a bit more CBD heavy to help her with her arthritis, which is what she says she's smoking it for. I think we all know that really she just likes getting really fucked up on skunk, and that's what she's smoking here. But they have a bit of a chat. They talk about. She says that he's kind of losing his edge a little bit. Over on the page, Fanny is puking up into the sink still, but as we know, the soul stuff, the magic mirror that she was puking up, is kind of made up of time and soul, and so her memories are kind of coalescing out of the puke, and it's flying up and creating the panels. It's really good art. Jill Thompson here is doing the Hernandez brothers, right? Love and Rockets, Tales of South American Life. Although I'm pretty sure I've never done Love and Rockets. I'm a bad comics fan. I've never done Love and Rockets. I'm a really big fan of Gilbert Hernandez's scary horror sci-fi comics. I love those, but I've never got into the slice of life stuff. Love and Rockets is one of those places where comics puts its big boy pants on and acts like a grown-up, and I'm not interested in that. I don't really like comics that are grown up. I like ones that have got magic and superheroes in them. We see Fanny, Hilda, as she was born, being born. Really like this, really like the drawings of the favelas, really like the drawing of this community of women gathering around Fanny's birth scene. Like young to old, all the generations of women are around it. It's a very Love and Rocketsy thing, that to have to have the socialness of women, like the subject of the comic. We meet what's her name, Doña Isola de Rio, Fanny's badass grandma. They're really cross because Fanny is born a boy, in quotes. She But then her mum tries to have another kid, a baby, but it's a boy again, and she miscarries. So Fanny's grandma, who's a badass witch, goes, "Oh well, Hilda Morales, we learn, is just going to have to be a boy. Is going to have to be a girl." And there's some tricky stuff here about you know, biological determinism of gender, about nature and nurture, as we used to say. Basically, Fanny was always trans anyway, and as fate and luck and magic would have it, her family's witch tradition wanted her to be a woman as well. So that all lines up fine. Her dad makes a slightly homophobic kind of objection to it, but really, it ain't up to him. He ain't involved. He's just a bloke drinking beer, watching the telly, and and he's terrified of Fanny's grandma, his mother-in-law, which is funny. And they present. So there's a bit of a moment here where the young Hilda, the young Fanny, sees this beautiful pink frock and she falls in love with it, and it's kind of implied that she sort of is made a woman by her witch grandma's magic here. But that's not how gender works, is it? We get more of Fanny's backstory over on page 14, more of her life. Her mum dies. That's very sad. So she's kind of adopted by her grandmother and her auntie, who's not her real auntie, but it doesn't matter. She learned about all of the gods that came before Cortez. There's a reference to the colonialism thing isn't something that I've just pulled out of my head, because there is this reference to Cortez and the conquistadors there. And when Fanny is coming into herself, when she's putting on her hero skin, there's this line, "I can deal with anything. It's my armor, beautiful armor." This is back on page 5. She-mail, chainmail, like the Crusaders, darling. So there's an awareness in Fanny that she's a colonized subject, and she works around it with her own kind of adoption of her like indigenous magical practices, which she has kind of thoroughly modernized. And then we get a reference to this is where she first learns about Mictlantecutli, the god of the underworld. If you remember whose kind of demon skin Fanny wore to defeat Orlando with back in the windmill when she sacrificed her tits. And this is where Fanny realizes that the bad thing that she was worried about when she was getting dressed up earlier is Mictlantecutli come to collect for the karmic debt that she owes him for having saved everyone's life, right? Obviously, having a debt with the god of the underworld, that could be messy, couldn't it? Grandma and Marta taught me to find and use Macona Brava and Rape dos Indios. These are kind of like Rape dos Indios is like slightly kind of makes you go buzzy snuff, and Macona Brava is like it's a bit like dope. I've never tried both, or at least I don't think I have. Macona Brava often crops up in like like weed substitutes, which were a thing a few years ago. So maybe I tried it. I don't know. Yeah, she's learning how to be a sorceress, all this herb lore. She's proper old school, but proper new school. And then she gets interested in boys. See how we have our green light here? This green light is passed between her and this boy. It's a ball, but it's in the iconography of the Invisibles. It's obviously the green for go symbol that we've seen before. So because she's getting interested in boys, her grandma says it's time, and they take Fanny off to Teotihuacan for her initiation, for her final. She's obviously on the cusp of puberty, and now she's being initiated into the mysteries of womanhood. This panel about Teotihuacan is done in the style. So there's another style at work here, which is along with all the other ones that Morrison's been throwing at us via Thompson. This is Ripley's Believe It or Not. These are crazy facts about Teotihuacan, the Pyramid City. Robert Ripley, what's the name? Paul Frame, I think it might be pronounced, kind of developed this style. But this is like he's like Ripley's Believe It or Not is this weird kind of it's like a circus in a comic, right? It's like a circus sideshow in not even comic strip form, but just in newspaper cartoon form. And that's one of the styles that is being kind of pick and mixed from. This is like it's like colonialism of the comic strip, right? All of this pick and mixing that Morrison's doing with Gay Abandon here is okay because he's doing it within his sphere, which is comics. You know, like postmodernism here, that magpie sensibility, that's okay. When you kind of stretch out and literally steal other people's shit, that's a problem. In my view, doing a cheeky homage to Robert Ripley style, Paul Frame style, is okay. You know, obviously, but there's a little kind of I think that there's a bit of Morrison here which is kind of justifying actual colonialism with this sort of postmodern syncretism, and he's saying, aren't they the same thing? Aren't they both okay? No, they're not the same thing. And we get a kind of a recap of the suns thing that Fanny was talking about, that kind of the cosmological origin story of the Meso-American law. Was the pyramid made by aliens? Yes, of course it was. It's just that we all used to call the aliens gods back then. It's fine. On the page, we've got Brody again. He is interrogating Kirby, who we saw mentioned on a few pages ago in the club. This stark black and white thing is a doing of Frank Miller's Sin City comics. You know, this is another magpie style thing. Do you know what, guys? I'm sorry to do this to you in real life, but this back cover hanging on by a single staple is really getting on my nerves. Oh, I didn't mean to rip it. I just thought it would come off. So I'm taking it off because it's dangling about and getting on my nerves. And I know that defacing, like mutilating comics isn't really allowed, but I've done it. Don't punish me for that transgression, oh God of comics. This is another one of those style things. I think that this kind of little experiment in mixing and matching styles that Morrison is making Jill Thompson do is a little bit rum because this spread shows that it doesn't really work. Frank Miller kind of was doing really sort of like big negative space, chiaroscuro, stark black and white, artist style aesthetic stuff. And it was an obvious like project that he was really kind of like deeply embedded in for a long time. Asking Jill Thompson to just do that for 2 pages is a really like thankless task, basically, and she kind of fails at it. The transposition of the black and white to her bodies doesn't quite work, right? The Frank Miller style is as much about his kind of chunky figure work as it is about the black and whiteness of it, and that's not in here because she's got to get paid for this job, for God's sake. Although it fits thematically with like the kind of the ugly violence of this page, and we learn a lot about Brody's kind of sadism and and it's a surprise that his kind of like old school manness is actually maybe wants a blowjob off a this trans woman. Which would so he's kind of he's a bit queer, right? But also like his violence, his sexuality is really tied up with violence. He's toxic masculinity walking in a 70s safari suit. But like I say, we'll talk about that in a few issues time. So he tortures Kirby and Kirby gives up Fanny Over on the next page, we've got an advert for Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Legends of darkness are not always myths. The design on this advert is really bad because you can't really read half of the words on it. I do think that the picture of new romantic David Sylvian vampire guy is quite amusing. He looks well Duran, as we would say. On to page 18. Hilda Fanny's initiation is well underway. She is given some what is probably ayahuasca tea. She trips out. She's tripping balls, and it's really cool. And because her initiation, her trip is very much an alien abduction. We have our grey guys here. The Mantis alien, who's another kind of often who after the Greys is probably the most often recounted figure met in abduction scenarios. We've got these little lizard guys here. We've got a little cat who is maybe also a lizard. Let's remember that the lizards that we saw in the advert for the Enigma in the previous issue. Let's also remember that a lizard initiates Fanny's mum. We found that out a few pages earlier. In my view, Greys are like the iconic figure of abduction lore, right? In my view, mantises. Push the mantis image a bit in your head. I think you'll find it responds more quickly than the grey one does. Probably shouldn't say that, but there you go. Push at the mantis thing. I think if you've ever had a really high fever, and you probably have, I think there's a chance you will have met a mantis on the periphery of your psyche. I think the greys are actually a bit further out. Also, magic corn, very Native American, right? Great picture of Fanny's face melting because she's like, oh my god, I'm so messed up from the crazy tea that she's had. She meets Barbalith, the red dot. More on that later, and she goes, oh. So she's undergoing a thoroughly, much like Dane in the underground, in the abandoned underground tube station. She's having a thorough abduction initiation experience here. Over the page, her grandma has gone totally badass with her tits out and this awesome makeup on. She's going for full-on witch steez here with her broom. She wounds Fanny on the thigh, in quotes, as a way of the thigh stands in for penis or genitals a lot in the Fisher King carries a wound in his thigh, and it's not really his thigh, is it? Zeus hides Dionysus. Dionysus is born. Dionysus, who is kind of maybe here, worried about, or back on our inside front cover advert, worrying about whether he left the gas on or not. Dionysus is born out of Zeus's thigh. Thigh is like a code for dick and balls quite a lot. And so I think it is here. I think that you're not allowed to show a little boy's, or you're not allowed to show a child's penis being wounded in a comic in the 90s, or indeed you just probably shouldn't show that in a comic. But I think that's what's going on here. So if you think about circumcision, if you think about kind of initiatory wounds, they're quite often a way of taking the menstrual women's mysteries stuff and giving it to men, right? Check out the Radical Anthropology group for some really interesting stuff about that. Google Radical Anthropology group, and they've got loads of brilliant videos up. And penis wounding, ouch. So circumcision or piercings. If you wound the penis, you symbolically give a man access to the same magic that a woman has through menstruation, right? We're back on here. We're back in Watchmen territory. Edith and King Mob are really high now in the boudoir. They're talking about, there's some really interesting stuff about how invisible cells are built around elemental symbolism. Dane, we hear, is the spirit element, and he's a very spirited spirit, as we know, and he's kind of going to put them all through the ringer. The journey to find Dane is obviously the theme of these next few issues of this big kind of like year 2 challenge for our Invisibles team, and it's gonna take all of them to some really difficult, special, challenging places, and in an exciting, action-packed way. They're really high. It's really funny. There's another pyramid. She calls him a milk toast. I didn't know what a milk toast was. It's another cartoon thing. So we've already had newspaper cartoons being referenced in this issue. Milk Toast comes from, what was his name? Cyril Milk Toast, The Insipid Man, which was a series of comics from the 20s. It's a very apt reference for her to make because, as we've established, she was around in the 20s. She was a young woman in the 20s, wasn't she? Look at how old she is. She must have been. She's cutting an apple. It's a Beatles reference. But yeah, these pages are quite annoying. There's lots of, like, the stuff they say maps to what's going on in the panels in a really, like, Watchmen-y way, and it's quite annoying once you spot it. You're like, oh yeah, this is just getting on my nerves. This isn't like at no point, I might lie about this. I might break this rule, but a rule for the Invisible podcast is that we will never talk about the Oedipal, Alan Moore, Grant Morrison thing. I'm probably going to break that rule, but when you notice it, these Watchmen pages in this issue are really annoying, and really that they're really like Oedipal. With Alan Moore being the big bad daddy of comics. There's a frieze of Quetzalcoatl. Like Hilda is still in her initiation here when she's a child. She's tripping balls, and she could probably see Quetzalcoatl coming alive in this stonework here. And then she is being approached by her Nahual, her spirit animal, her totem protector. And it's this butterfly who we've seen flying around the entire issue ever since the cover. He's been hiding in the corners and coming to see us. Over on the next page, we've got an advert for the House of Blues. We covered that last issue. I don't want to live in the House of Blues. That's fine. And then Hilda Fanny is touched by her totem. It's a lovely little scene. It's well trippy, and the butterfly says to her, "You're not having your initiation now. You're actually in a club in Soho puking up." And she's like, "Oh no, am I?" We learn that Fanny's 23, which is obviously a very Invisibles-y age to be. That would place this in like 1981, 82. 11. She's 12 here. It's 11 years ago. She's 23 now. And she's throwing up in a toilet in a country far from here. She's actually technically she's throwing up in a sink, but the room she's in is a toilet, right? It's a ladies. She's puking up there. Brody finds her, having been given the skinny of where she is by Kirby. He appears in like that bit of her, of Brody being the Mictlan Tekutli avatar, is really creepy. And in the mirror there, that's on page 23. Oh, we're on page 23. It's all about to happen. Basically, the bad guy has come to collect on Fanny's debt, and we already know that we really don't like him. He's creepy and bad and horrible and very toxic masculinity. There was something else I wanted to say about this page, was there? The graffiti's funny. Yeah. There's like a thread of initiation stuff here. And remember that, like, from some angles, the Invisibles is a very sort of Masonic, Illuminoid work. So Fanny's initiation is taking place on this black and white checkerboard motif pattern style thing. He says to her, "You're no lady, are you?" Yeah, he's very unreconstructed. We don't like Brody. Over the page. Fun little finisher page here. Oh my god. There's like, this was kind of, there was an advert. I can't remember what the advert was for. Maybe I'll look it up. But there was an advert which was like a phone going off in a room that nobody had been in, and it was quite a, in a kind of an 80s style. It was quite a lavishly produced rendering of room that nobody had been in for a long time, and a phone's ringing, and somebody goes in there because it was like a complaints department for like Carlsberg or something. Yeah, I think that was it, in fact. So obviously Carlsberg is such a great beer that nobody ever complains about it. So their complaints department is abandoned and has got like an old style phone in it. And somebody kind of goes into the room for the first time in years, picks up the phone and is like, oh, no, wrong number. And we see that it's the Carlsberg complaints department because it's a room that no one ever goes into. This is the same joke being done here for Division X. Division X were mentioned back in the rifle range with Brody and Sir Miles, and we're going to learn about Division X in a few issues' time. It's going to be really good fun, and that's when we're going to talk about the weird 70s masculinity thing that Brody represents, and we're gonna go quite deep on that, I think, because there's probably a lot to say, and it's quite a good excuse for me to watch a load of old cop shows from the 70s, isn't it? That's the end of the issue. The cliffhanger. This is a funny little epilogue. We're not sure who answers the phone. Maybe it's Sir Miles. But the cliffhanger is Mictlantecuhtli struck Brody coming to get Fanny. Over on the letters page, Grant Morrison welcomes back Jill Thompson. He gives us a little bit of a rundown on what to expect of the next few issues, which is that we're going to be looking a bit more closely at our Invisibles, at the Invisibles in King Bob's core team. He kind of has a bit of a moan about the sales being down, but that's gonna take us to some crazy places in a few issues' time, which we're going to really enjoy. There's only one letter. It's a single-page letters page of Invisible Ink this month. It's by John L. Robeson from Mount Pleasant, SC. Was that South Carolina, I guess? Good letter. He talks about chaos magic and violence as a revolutionary tool. And he's a bit like, there, and it's a fair point, but the Invisibles is really like, does really glorify an ultraviolence. And that's fun. That's fine, I think. But as an actual, but like gun violence as an actual kind of like revolutionary tool, is that an okay thing to be talking about? I think from any kind of historical perspective it is, actually, but this is a kids comic, so we do have to kind of pretend that like maybe it isn't. Morrison is like, we're gonna explore the issues of whether you can murder in the name of your ideals throughout. It's one of the main things with the Invisibles, and that's a fair answer to a fair question. He says a really interesting thing about chaos magic, because by now he's been quite open about how this is like a chaos magic not inspired comic necessarily, but just like a comic that is chaos magic in a way, or that is kind of a chaos magic working. And Morrison has a nice little bit about how he enjoyed getting into punk magic in the 80s because it was punk magic. It meant he didn't have to learn a load of boring Kabbalah, spontaneous, fun, shorn of a lot of the ludicrous magical wars. This is Morrison, I've spent years customizing my own rituals, god forms, spirit allies, cosmologies, etc., and now have a unique and personal symbolic framework in which to perform magical work. Anyone can do the same. I've never been particularly interested in controlling people. Magic for me is a working technology for exploring alternate realities, breaking down behavioral programs, coming to an understanding with death, capital D, and having a laugh. Which I think is a very kind of pithy and useful summation of the thing. He goes on back on the gun violence issue and the killing in the name of ideals. When the guns are in the hands of, for instance, ghetto-wise black kids in South Central LA, but guns and killing are absolutely wrong when the guns are in the hands of, for instance, ghetto-wise black kids in South Central LA, but absolutely right when those same guns are in the hands of those same kids, but now the kids are wearing US Army uniforms and are shooting towel heads in Kuwait. How little things change. Although you probably wouldn't talk about South Central LA, you'd probably talk about schools now, right, as being the kind of the site of bad gun violence. Next issue, just who are Division X and why do they wear those kipper ties? Is that really in the next issue? I don't think it's in the next issue. I think it's a few issues away. What are Lewis Brody's brutal plans for Lord Fanny? How is Mictlantecuhtli, the god of death, involved? Fanny's career as a prostitute is explored, Jonna Dreams puts in another appearance, and King Mob inches ever closer to disaster as bloody Aztec sorcery and gorgeous clothes join forces for Day of Nine Dogs. Looking forward to it. From my memory, I haven't read them yet, obviously, but from my memory, the next 2 issues are actually pretty good. And we're going to hopefully be doing something a bit different in the next issue-sode of the Invisible podcast. So definitely be along for that. Hopefully we'll pick up some new listeners because I'm giving this one away for free, right? It's Christmas. Maybe I'll get some new listeners for or viewers for Christmas. Over on the mail order page, got a very caught up in himself, Mark Hempel, I think, drawing of Morpheus again, our boy from the Sandman. Pull a small thread and unravel reality. You've got to love these Vertigo comics from the 90s of how like up for it they were in terms of all this kind of thing, right? They were definitely about freaking out your mind, and they do it to greater and lesser degrees. But like as an editorial position for the entire comic line to adopt, it's cool. Like, yeah, freak the kids out, do it, blow the squares' minds. On the Ledge column is by Nick Abadzis. It's quite good. He's very humble. He swears a lot. It's quite witty, and he just signs off with cheers, which is a great way to sign off. Cheers. Very Britpop. That's an advert. That's a kind of an editorial piece in support of his comic Millennium Fever, which comes out this month, drawn by sort of Invisible's guy Duncan Fagredo. When a nerdy guy finally gets the girl of his dreams through a personal ad, his life turns upside down. The future of the planet through the eyes of young love and a girl with a secret that's out of this world collide in this romantic comedy by Nick Abadzis and Duncan Fagredo. Nick Abadzis, I like him. I like his Hugo Tate comics. I think, and like I say, his on the Ledge column here is charming. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because he doesn't really say anything, but it's charming and he does some good swearing. Other stuff you can get this month from Vertigo includes the Dreams and Nightmares thing, if you want. There's a new Sandman hardcover out, Books of Magic, Invisibles, Goddess, new ones. Vertigo, or kind of coming next month, Vertigo Voices, The Eaters. That's a good one. Dean Ormston's art back when he was still like kind of like weird and gnarly stuff. Like kind of a family comedy drama about cannibalism. And from what I can remember, but it's written by Pete Milligan, and the jokes are really good and really like not subtle about like play on words of like eating people. It's good fun. Also, there's a new Tank Girl book out because obviously this is around the time of the Tank Girl movie, so there's a lot of Tank Girl tie-ins. This one's written by Alan Grant of Batman and Judge Dredd fame, drawn by Andy Pritchett and Philip Bond, with covers by Brian Bolland. All the world's fanatical cults, a bit like the Invisibles, converge on a small shack in the Australian outback to prepare for the birth of a new messiah. And the race is on to find his mother and control his upbringing. My God, this millenarian stuff was so everywhere in the 90s, wasn't it? But this Madonna packs a big gun. Everyone's favourite anti-heroine returns, nauseous, bloated, and a bit cranky, pregnant Tank Girl probably would be in this new miniseries. Sounds great. Alan Grant can. He's great. Let's not mince words. The guy's great. Mr. Punch trade paperback, a lyrical tale of childhood wonder, adult secrets, and the haunting memories of one long, strange summer by the sea. The best-selling and critically acclaimed graphic novel heralds the finest collaboration by Eisner Award-winning creators Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Have I said this before? I think I probably have. I feel a bit like I'm trapped in a loop, going round and round of saying how so many of these overrated Dave McKean and Neil Gaiman comics are shit. Mr. Punch is the shittest. Don't read it. Read Violent Cases. Read Signal to Noise. And if you really want more, read, I don't know, like there's the Hellblazer one, or the Black Orchid one has probably got some merits to it. So read that. Don't read Mr. Punch. It's freaking awful. Batman Man Bat is still going. We're excited about that. I haven't found it yet. But yeah, it's a prestige Elseworlds miniseries by Jamie Delano and John Bolton about Batman fighting a guy called Man Bat. What could be bad about that? Over on the back page, we've got it's a rerun of last month's Judge Dredd toys. Judge Dredd toys, for goodness sake. Advert. the more I look at these awesome looking toys, the more unhappy I am about the fact that I've literally never seen one in the flesh, in the plastic, before in my life. And okay, that was a bit quick. We've rattled through this one today, but it's Christmas and I've got wrapping to do. As I said before, thanks ever so much for joining us. This one's going free. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Be cool in 2020. Put on your hero skin and kick ass. Tell your friends about the Invisible Podcast and what a great time you've had watching it. I'm going to remember to look into the eye of the camera a bit more to create a connection next time, which I've forgotten to do. Next issue is going to be great. Maybe something a bit different. Fingers crossed it all comes together. Lots of love. Happy Christmas. The world isn't going to end. We're going to be okay. Take care. And I'm going to sign off like Nicobadzis would by saying cheers.